Quick show of hands. Who else wants to write engaging main characters? Well, I certainly do. But how do you do it? How do you take the writing theory and how do you actually translate that onto the page? So in this video, we're going to talk about an extremely practical approach to writing engaging main characters, and it works in any genre. What's up, guys? Michael Laron here with Author Level Up, helping you write world-class stories better and faster. And I believe each of you has Stephen King level quality inside you, and all you need is just some help unlocking it. So if this is your first time here, consider subscribing and click that little bell, ding, 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 to get writing notifications every time I have a new video. And in this video, we're talking about a practical approach to writing engaging main characters. And it's the kickoff in my first inaugural Author Level Up season, which is how to write engaging main characters. So there's lots more videos coming with this exact same topic, but I'm going to hit it from different angles. And I don't know about you guys, but I like a dose of practicality with my writing advice. I don't want to just know the theory of what something is or a technique or how to use it. I actually want to know how to translate that onto the page, which is one of the reasons I don't believe that studying movie characters and studying films is an effective way of learning how to write fiction. They're totally different. Movies teach you how to do plot. They don't teach you how to do character. The best way to study character is to actually study writing, right? And so I was really pleased a few years ago to stumble across the book Creating Characters, How to Build Story People by Dwight V. Swain. Now, you may have heard of Dwight V. Swain because he wrote another more famous book called Techniques of the Selling Writer, which is an excellent book in its own right. But I actually like Creating Characters better because I really like that he gets into the nuts and bolts in theory. And he takes the theory and gives a dose of practicality. So I'm going to spend the video talking about the principles behind this book because I really do believe that it transformed the way that I see character. And the reason I like the book so much is because it validated many of the things that I already knew to be true. I think at the point I found this book, I had written, I think, 10 books so far. And as I was reading it, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, this actually makes sense. This is exactly what I did or what I was trying to do in a prior novel. And it was just really cool to see that another writer came across the same ideas independently, right? And so I think there's this undercurrent of thought that a lot of writers stumble upon. And so it's really cool to see that. But the main premise of Swain's book is that the core element that any character needs to have is the ability to care. And this is the most fundamental thing you can think of, right? So he uses the analogy in the book of a newlywed couple. So a husband and a wife. And the husband is a neat freak. He has to have everything the right way. He's organized, likes to clean a lot, just likes to have everything just so. But the wife isn't. The wife leaves her food laying around. She doesn't pick up her clothes. And so that causes friction between the couple. Because if you think about the husband, if the husband is the main character, he cares about organization. But if the wife is a main character, she doesn't care about organization. Maybe she cares about something else. And because they don't care about the same thing, there's that friction. It's that ability to care. And I think that every character fundamentally has this. And it's not something that you need to do a whole lot of prep work to know. You just have to know, what does this person stand for, right? And I don't think that you need to do any character work or character sheets or outlines to know that. It's the most fundamental part of the character. Now, once you've established the dominant dynamic of the character, the ability to care, then begins the process of what Swain calls rationalization. Now, rationalization is what the writer does to make the character feel real. And it's a process of taking things that the writer sees in real life and imparting those elements into the character to make them feel real. I get a lot of emails from you guys about, how do you start writing fiction, or what's my best advice for a beginner who's just starting out, and all sorts of things. And I really love getting emails from you guys, and I've had to answer this question over and over again. And one of the things that I often tell newbies, people who have never written a book before or who are aspiring to write a book, I tell them, be a student of people. That is one of the most important things you can learn as a fiction writer, because if you can be a student of people, you can learn to replicate them on the page and make them feel more realistic. And so, to give you an example, take the virtue or the opposite of virtue of impatience. So, a little bit of a story here. So, the place I work at has bathrooms, naturally, but in these bathrooms there are these automatic sinks, and they have automatic soap dispensers, and they are the worst automatic soap dispensers in the history of time. They don't work half the time. You've got to wave your hand under them several times to get them to even recognize your existence. And when you do get a little bit of soap, I mean, it's just like a little pebble of soap, a little pebble of foam, and you got to do it again, and then they're just terrible, right? And it's a constant complaint at the company I work at that the soap dispensers never work. And so one day I was in the bathroom and I happened to see an executive, and he was there, and there's 3 sinks. And what he did was he stood in the middle sink, and then he put out his hands to the right soap dispenser and to the left soap dispenser, got 2 pumps of soap at the same time, and then started washing his hands, and then rushed out of the bathroom. And he looked like he was in a big hurry, and I thought, man, what's the story there? Why would you do that? Is it because he was in a hurry? Is it because he's just a type A personality and doesn't like the fact that the soap dispensers don't work like everybody else, or was there something else there? And that was an interesting character trait. And so if I were to write that into a story, it might look something like this. Let's say I have a detective story, and I've got a detective who uses the bathroom at the police station, and it's a same situation where the soap dispensers don't work, and so you've got the character standing under the standing at the sink trying to make the soap dispensers work, and he might remark something he might talk about the bathrooms and how they don't work and all the sorts of things, but then he might say, I should be out there catching a killer, but here I am playing handsy with a soap dispenser that doesn't love me back, right? And so he stands in the middle sink and gets them, does the thing that I saw the executive do. And that's interesting, right? That's interesting. He's contextualizing his world. And the great thing about rationalization is I've taken something I've seen in the real world, I've imparted it into a character, and then that puts the ball in the reader's court, because then the reader has to respond to it. I mean, they can either relate to it or they cannot relate to it. But if they relate to it, they might think something like, "Oh, wow, that's actually an ingenious idea, standing in the middle sink and then getting soap like that." Or they might say, "This guy needs to calm down," or they might think, "Hey, wait, that's interesting. It's weird," but it makes them look inside themselves, right? So you're rationalizing the real world onto the page, which makes them look at the real page and look inside themselves to determine how they feel about something. And so that's the process that Swain talks about, and it's this process that's fundamental to fiction writing that can't be overlooked. But here's the thing: in real life, people don't like to be rationalized. Like if I'd asked that executive, "Hey, that thing at the sink you did, why'd you do that thing you did?" I would probably get stared at. He'd be like, "What are you talking about?" Right? Because in real life, people don't like to have to rationalize their decisions. They don't want to have to think about why they do the things they do. Right? It's frustrating. It's exhausting. But in fiction, that's the way that the writer brings out characterization on the page, because if on the page, if you think about it, if all the character did was action, if he went to the sink and he got soap and then he walked out the door and then he talked to a colleague, that would be the most boring thing ever, right? It would be boring. That's why you want to characterize them and rationalize them, so that it's that connection between fiction and reality. Now, I've done some more content on people watching, and I have an episode of my podcast, The Writer's Journey, where I actually talk about my specific process of how I people watch and how I learned to do it over the years. So I'll drop a link to that in the video description, and I highly recommend you check it out. I think it's only like 5 or 7 minutes, but this is a really important skill for a fiction writer to learn. So naturally, Swain spends a lot of time on rationalization, but he spends the time on rationalization because it's a lead up to what I think is the golden idea of the book. And that is, in order to write engaging main characters, you have to write characters that feel real. All right. So, in order to write engaging main characters, you have to write a character that feels real. And I believe, which is why I don't believe in studying films as a fiction writer, that you create an engaging character through characterization. And characterization is careful details, like that one little instance at the sink, right? That's not has nothing to do with plot, has nothing to do with the story. It's just the character talking about something. That's how you characterize somebody, and you do that very carefully on the page through the details that you select, through the sensory details that the character describes, through the setting, through the interactions with other characters. That's how you bring out the character. And unlike a lot of people, and this, I guess this makes me kind of weird in this sense, I don't believe that this is something you can plan. You can't sit down and say, at least I don't believe you can. I don't think you can sit down and say, I want my character to have this characterization moment and this magic moment in chapter 5 and then this magic moment in chapter 7. That just feels robotic to me. I think that the best characterization happens in real time on the page when you're writing. You can't plan for it. It's these little moments that just present themselves, and you just have to recognize when they pop up so that you can use the skill that you're building by watching this video to be more intentional about creating an engaging character on the page. Again, that's my opinion, but I liken it to sketching, right? So if you think about sketching or drawing, you're drawing an image on a page. You have an image in your head of what you think the image should look like, but 99% of the time, or 0% of the time, it never looks exactly like you think it's going to look on the page. And I think writing is the same way. And it's learning that how to translate what's in your head onto the page, but being okay with what ends up on the page, I think is important. Now, to keep this practical, right, because we've talked about a lot of theory, so to make this more practical, Dwayne addresses this, and he says, I believe that you've got to get this on the page, but I believe that the way that you make this practical and the way that you approach this is to understand human psychology, right? So an understanding of human psychology is something that he spends quite a bit of time on in the book. And the reason for that is because if you understand human psychology, then you can understand how to take human psychology and put that into the world of your characters, right? Because if you're going to agree to the premise that you want to treat the character like a real person, then that person has to abide within the laws of real psychology, right? I think it makes a lot of sense. And so think about it like this. When you meet somebody, you form a first impression, and it takes 2 seconds to form a first impression about someone, right? What if it were true that your character forms a first impression in the minds of a reader, right? So think about the last friend that you made. When you met that friend for the first time, you probably didn't know that they were going to be a friend, but they gave you a first impression. There was something about them that either affirmed or subverted everything in your life that you either knew to be true at that point. And that friend made an impression on you. It could have been positive, it could have been negative. Sometimes the best friendships start with negative first impressions, but it was a first impression nonetheless. And if you think about that, what would the first impression of your character look like? So that could be a number of things, right? It could be character tags. So a pet phrase or a favorite piece of dialogue that the character says now that they're going to say throughout the book, right? Or a certain mannerism that the character might have, or a certain special object that's important to them, or like a piece of clothing or a jacket. Something that immediately characterizes that character and makes the reader get a first impression in their head. And that's important. So when you have character tags, the key with your tags is to sprinkle them in. You don't want to introduce everything at once, but just sprinkle in the most important things, water them in like seeds, and then they'll start to grow as things move on. Now, if we go back to the friend example, right? You think about the first impression that you have of your friend, then you have a second impression, right? You start to spend more time with that person and you start to understand what they're about and what they stand for and experiences that they've had in their life. And you start to recognize the qualities that make you want to be that person's friend. And you're intrigued by them. You want to spend more time with them. But that doesn't happen all at once. It happens slowly over a period of days, weeks, or even months, right? And characters are the same way. You don't dump everything on page one for that character, or you don't dump everything in chapter three. You introduce those details over time, and the readers slowly start to understand, hey, this is somebody that I actually would like to spend time with. So once this journey begins, this second impression, I call it, that's what I like to call it. Swain talks about the transition into what he calls the dominant impression. I like to call it second impression, but he calls it the dominant impression. And the dominant impression consists of four components. So those four components are age, vocation, sex, and manner. All right. So age and sex are pretty self-explanatory, but he uses the example of a loud, pushy, female middle-aged travel agent. All right. A loud, pushy, middle-aged female travel agent. That tells you a lot about that character, right? And so if you look at those four different elements, that can give you that dominant impression, and that gives you a sense of what that character is like. So age and sex, like I said, are pretty self-explanatory, but profession is something that's pretty important. And the reason I think that profession is important is because never underestimate the power of curiosity. So if your main character is in a profession that the reader has never been in, don't underestimate the fact that readers might be curious about what the day in the life of a bounty hunter is like. What are the untold things that bounty hunters know that nobody would know about, right? What's it like to have a gun pointed at your face? How many times have you had a gun pointed at your face? What are a bounty hunter's main frustrations with the profession? What's the reason someone becomes a bounty hunter in the first place? Readers are interested in stuff like that, right? Another example would be, say you have a photographer and you have a photographer at a photo shoot. That's interesting. What would that photo shoot be like from the perspective of that photographer? And then when we get into that fourth component, we have manner, right? So what's that person like? So in the photographer example, how do they treat their clients in a photo shoot? Are they pushy, or are they creative? Are they trying to get the customers out because they've got another photo shoot in 20 minutes? Or do they take their sweet time and they try all sorts of different poses and try different things, and maybe they're good with kids, and maybe they're good with calming people who are nervous on camera, things like that. That's that important second impression that you start to give the reader through the age, gender, vocation, and manner of the character. And I have to say this again because it's really important. When you meet a friend, you don't tell them your whole life story the first time you meet them. That's just creepy, okay? You don't do that. You meet them, you get to know about them, and then over time, you get to know who they are, and vice versa. It's the same thing with your character. Don't introduce everything with your character on page one. You build that relationship over time. Now, Swain talks about all of this, right? You've built all of this. You built this nice little pyramid with, the character's ability to care. You've got the process of rationalization, and then you've got a first impression and a second impression. And all of this can be destroyed in just a couple sentences, right? And so he talks about how to protect this really important character work that you've built. And he talks about ways that you can avoid disengaging your main characters. And there are 7 things in particular that he talks about that will just rip characters out of your story in a heartbeat, and they'll leave and they won't come back. The first component is falling out of viewpoint. So if you're writing a story through the character of, or through the perspective of one character, and then you accidentally jump into another character without meaning to do it, that jars the reader, and they say, hey, hold on a second. I thought I was in the head of this character, right? And now I'm in the head of this. This is strange. Now, there is a way to do that, and you may have heard of the term head hopping. That's beyond the scope of this video, but that's where I think a good editor can really help make sure that if you have any of those false slips of point of view, that you can correct those in editing, because the last thing you want to do is make the readers go huh in the middle of their heads, right? You don't want to do that. The next element is not doing enough research. So if you have a police officer in your story and you have a police officer doing things that a police officer would never do in real life, readers are gonna say, wait, hold on a second, that's strange, and then they're gonna leave. Now the next element is telling and not showing. Duh. After that, we have failing to suspend the reader's disbelief, which I think makes a lot of sense if you think about fiction is the suspension of disbelief, but there are certain ways that you can disengage your characters or disengage your readers by doing things that make them shake their heads. And then the next element is failing to foreshadow without a good reason, right? So this is just when you spring things upon the reader, like deaths of important characters or things that the readers didn't see coming that you really didn't have a good reason to do. I think foreshadowing is important, and it's a good thing to do, and readers expect it. They just don't want it to be over the top or so completely on the nose that it just seems silly. So doing things without foreshadowing can sometimes jar readers out of a story. The next component is things that are morally reprehensible. So child molestation, rape, senseless killing, things like that. Just avoid stuff like that. You don't want to put stuff like that in your story. Now, there are some people that will disagree with that, and if you're writing horror or certain genres and things like that. But in general, people don't want to see your main character raping somebody or killing people senselessly. It's just people don't want to see that. That's not why they pick up books to read. They pick up books to read because it's an escape, right? There's a certain amount of violence people will tolerate, right? But I think that's crossing the line, and when you do that, you risk alienating a lot of your reader base. So that's another thing that will rip them out of the story. There's a time to play it safe in fiction and a time to not play it safe in fiction. I think this is one of those times where you want to play it safe in fiction. And please, guys, no comments on politically correct or politics or anything like that. I'm just talking about fundamental basics here that respect your readers, right? So I've thrown a lot at you in this video, but if I were to recap the main ideas that I've taught you so far about Swain's book, it's that the core element of any character is the ability to care, right? This is fundamental. And that there's a process of rationalization, which is how you take elements from real life and impart those into a real character. And the reason you do that is because you want to treat your characters as if they are real people. And real people are subject to the laws of psychology, right? And so the way that you do that is through careful characterization on the page, and by remembering that characters are going to give readers a first impression, and they're also going to give readers a second impression that reveals who they are throughout a series of chapters, right? And that's an important piece, and that's all really important character work, and you want to protect that character work by following some common sense tactics that will help keep your readers engaged. So as you can tell, I really love this book, and to be honest with you, I really didn't spoil a whole lot on the book. I maybe talked about things that are in 3 or 4 of the chapters. There's a lot more stuff that's extremely practical in Swain's book that I really didn't even talk about today. So I will drop a link to the book in the comments or in the video description. Highly recommend that you check it out, and also check out the episode of my podcast that I talked about, where I talked about how you can people watch better and more effectively. And if you haven't already, be sure to watch the rest of the videos in my How to Create Engaging Characters YouTube series, I guess I'll call it, to help you write more engaging characters and ultimately more engaging fiction. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.